Welcome to the Geekery podcast, where action is the name of the game. I'm Void, and I'm here with my co-host Beej.
Rambo.
Not that kind of action. Today we're talking about action RPGs because they're kind of weird. I think that's why we want to talk about them, right? They don't fit in neatly to one genre or another. And there's a lot of as we started pulling a list together about stuff that we wanted to just touch on really quick. There's a lot of fuzziness in genres around action RPGs.
And I was looking at different lists and things like that, just kind of to refresh myself. And there are things that people have listed on these ranked lists of action RPGs that there is in no way I would consider them action RPGs. That I look at it and see Castlevania Symphony of the Night is not an action RPG in my mind. There's no way. I Borderlands. I see where they're coming from, but I don't look at Borderlands as an action RPG. Are you the same way where you see some of this stuff and it's just nah, that's an action game?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a little bit more tolerant of it because if people want to consider it that, I'm not going to go fight somebody over it. But yeah, there's a lot that's questionable. And one of the good illustrations, I mean, we'll dive into game by game here in a little bit, but one of the good illustrations I always found was Zelda, because Legend of Zelda, a lot of people are that's not an RPG, and other people are that's an action game, and then some people are it's an action RPG, and that is a conversation that nobody can ever win. No. There's no end to that conversation because you always have a counterpoint, and then you run in these circles, and it just never resolves.
Even with the traditional definition of a role-playing game, that there's always this kind of bleed over when it comes to action RPGs, where they're not traditional role-playing games where you'll have turn-based combat, you'll have a long narrative story, character development, experience points, levels, equipment, this kind of micromanagement as well, where Zelda doesn't necessarily have all of that. The very original Zelda is nowhere near the original Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy in terms of story, but it still has some of those same elements, which is why it gets really fuzzy for some people. And it's also why action RPGs are a really good gateway to people who want to get more into role-playing games, because it's probably more like a game they've already played and can kind of move them into that direction.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I mean, basically anything that has general RPG elements attached to it and it isn't turn-based, anything within that realm, you can kind of make an argument is an action RPG in some way, shape, or form, is kind of what I landed on from a very high level. And
these days, though, it gets a little bit iffy because so many games, and just the way that game development has gone, so many games are implementing one or two of those elements in there, being super narrative driven or moving character development, Tomb Raider. The new Tomb Raider games have role-playing game elements in them with the crafting and the becoming more powerful over time. And it's I wouldn't consider that a role-playing game, though.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I was trying to figure out what the criteria would be here, and it feels like something that requires some level of Twitch skill, but still retains some of the RPG elements of, kind of classic or traditional RPG games. It's really, if it's turn-based, if it's something that pauses time completely, those kind of games end up in, okay, that's a turn-based RPG, or that's a strategy RPG, or something that's obviously not action. But a lot of those action, just third-person action games have so many RPG elements, like you were saying, that you can make the argument either way. I don't mentally classify them that way. I wouldn't say an Uncharted or a Tomb Raider or anything like that you're mentioning is an RPG. But I'm also not going to go tell somebody that they're not if somebody's adamant about it, because I can kind of see it.
Yeah, I could see where they would make the argument. And I guess for me, it's at the end of the day, which one trumps the other in terms of gameplay and progression, where if you are if it's Twitch based, where you can succeed based on your Twitch skills better, like in Tomb Raider or Uncharted, where the action part is less reliant on your stats, that you can get past this part, or it doesn't matter what your equipment is like if you're better at the game. That's one thing, but I always look at role-playing games being the ones where the numbers are what matter the most. It doesn't matter how good you are at Ni no Kuni 2 if you don't have have better armor and better weapons and have leveled up your character, there's no way you're going to be able to beat these later enemies. Like the same for Kingdom Hearts, that there's just no way you can, as good as you are at the combat, there's no way to beat it without the stat increases from the character progression. I guess that's how I look at it. Which one trumps the other?
And it's kind of like, then you start getting into the realm of, okay, what about Destiny? Like, what about games like that? Because it has that. Like, if you don't upgrade your gear, if you don't level up, if you don't get your light level up, or whatever the newest systems are in Destiny, I haven't played since like Destiny 2 came out. But it's that loot shooter or schluter, as more and more people are saying. I don't like that word a whole lot.
No, I don't like that at all. I've not seen that one.
It doesn't have a good mouthfeel to it.
No, schluter?
Yeah, but I understand where it came from. Like anything in that like loot shooter genre, you can probably, not everything, but most of it, you could kind of make the argument like, yeah, that's kind of an action RPG. Because if you look at it, it's like, what about Mass Effect? Like Mass Effect is an action RPG. There's no question.
Right. No doubt.
But like Destiny is not that far away, or like Anthem, like they're not that far away from Mass Effect. So it's like the lines are super fuzzy in there.
And I've always actually considered Destiny and Anthem to be action RPGs. That was the way that I considered them for so long. That's actually why I picked up Destiny to begin with, is because of the action RPG elements in it, as opposed to being more of a traditional first-person shooter like Call of Duty or things like that.
Oh, for sure. And then, I mean, you asked a really good question as we were trying to get the notes together for today, is like, where do Muso games fit into this?
Because they're the ones that really, really hybridize both of these kind of straight down the middle, because you have just mass action that like you're destroying armies upon armies of enemies, depending on which one it is. I mean, if you're in Dynasty Warriors or like Hyrule Warriors, there are going to be more enemies on the screen coming at you than like DQ heroes, and they're Dragon Quest heroes. And so you're looking at it from that perspective, but it's also, you are straight up leveling up your armies, you're leveling up your characters, you're getting new items and abilities, and it's like Persona 5 Scramble is coming out next year, I think, where it's a Persona game. Those are absolutely turn-based turn-based role-playing games. And here we've got a Muso game coming out that, is it an action RPG because it's Persona, or what elements are they going to keep? Because it's not going to be a straight-up action game. We know that much.
Yeah, so all of that to say, the lines are blurry. You guys are going to have to just bear with us for like the games we talk about, because we could argue that most games are, but we're trying to narrow it to the things that we believe are truly some kind of action RPG. So with all of that being said, from a high level for action RPGs, this genre is like super hit and miss with me, and it's not even dependent on like the subgenre of game, or like even franchise history sometimes doesn't steer me in the right way. This is a genre that it's just extremely like all over the place. Like some games I'll absolutely love, and a lot of them I'll just bounce off of right away. But for you, it seemed like you kind of have these like small subsets where you really like them, and then you kind of ignore the rest, right?
Yeah, I do. I like the Kingdom Hearts, Legend of Zelda kind of JRPG, where it's story based. It is predominantly stat and equipment management action, where it's twitchy, but it's not reliant on me being a 12-year-old being able to move my fingers in upside down directions and twist them like pretzels. I cannot do that anymore. So I like games like that versus something like the loot shooters, I don't even know what to call them, the loot collection games like Diablo, the dungeon crawlers. I don't like those nearly as much. The Torchlight and the Diablos and the games where that is the primary thing. The Borderlands. I mean, like I was saying, the stuff where you're just getting better loot over and over again generally are not games that I'm going to stick with for any given time, because it's not something that's fun to me, and it's those very base elements of the genre, like the way that you play and the purpose of the game, that really holds me back on a lot of those.
Yeah, I don't like the grind a whole lot either. I like something that's going to bring me through the story or give me an experience or get me to the next thing without a ton of grinding. And then I just never enjoy that end game treadmill of just like get more loot to get more loot. That's not compelling for me. So I think I'm kind of on the same page as you.
And I think for me also, it's the kind of combat that you get in those kind of games that in the looter dungeon crawler game, you tend to have more of a simplistic combat system. Like Diablo, you'll get the, different abilities that you can use in a few keybinds and that's it. You're going to have different kinds of simple combat systems like Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 is absolutely one of the kind of grindy action dungeon crawler RPGs. And you have like 4 abilities that you can do at any given time. Like you build up to 4 abilities, like that's all you get. You're building up your characters, you're building up cosmetic suits, you're doing all of this, but it's very simple combat when you compare it to something like Xenoblade Chronicles 2, or Final Fantasy 15. Those are definitely more in-depth combat systems.
Yeah. And it runs the gamut, right? So like a bunch of games that we were just throwing stuff on the list to try to like get our heads around it even. And these are ones we didn't want to talk about super in depth, but just so you guys know where our heads are at, like Diablo, like 1, 2, and 3, all of them, Witcher 3, Dark Souls and Bloodborne, and that whole like Soulsborne genre as a whole. Skyrim, you got like Fallout 3 and 4 are good examples of stuff in here. Secret of Mana, like Cat's Quest and Ys, like it's wide variety out there of games.
And you can look at like the East games where they've changed now to be more of a Kingdom Hearts game that started in, I think, East 7. They redid the combat because for years, the way that those games were, like looking at them in the 16-bit era, especially, it's like you have Link to the Past where it's a traditional Zelda style game. And then you have East that is bump combat, that you run into enemies within certain directions and it does damage to you both depending on what direction you hit them from. And so it's a special kind of combat that is definitely action based, but where does it fall in between, say, the dungeon crawler more simple combat versus the Zelda or Kingdom Hearts whatever kind of action combat? It falls in kind of in a middle weird place where it's just unique in some ways.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about like our favorite ones in the genre that we ended up pulling out. I'm going to start with one of mine that's like probably the controversial one because it's in that fuzziness zone, so I'll get it out of the way. But just Breath of the Wild. Like that, and also Link Between Worlds, so a couple different Zelda games mixed in here. You could argue that they're not RPGs, but I'm going to throw them in here because they're kind of part of the mix, just depending on where you draw the line. So Breath of the Wild is amazing. Link Between Worlds is amazing. That's kind of all I'm going to say because they're not prototypical examples of the genre, and I think the other ones we have on this list are better, but I can't go without saying that those are kind of a possibility depending on where you draw that line.
Yeah, and I think there are different kinds of action RPGs too, because even with Breath of the Wild being what it is, it feels more like a Western, I don't want to say American, it feels more like a Western JRPG or action RPG as opposed to the JRPG that like Link Between Worlds feels like, because of it being third person open world over the shoulder action as opposed to kind of top down searching around screen kind of action RPG.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, they're very different.
They do 2 completely different kinds of action there.
Yeah, and like I said, I could argue for either one being either in or out of this classification, but like I think the other ones on our list are pretty solid. I mean, one that I put on your list for you is Kingdom Hearts because I knew it was going to be there.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's kind of the quintessential action RPG, and it's weird because it's a PS2 game, and there were plenty of action RPGs before the PlayStation 2, but it's the one that I go back to all the time when I want to think about just straight up action RPG because it has a story, it has it doesn't make any sense, but it has a lasting, cohesive narrative that has gone for 15, 20 years. You have character development in terms of you're learning new spells, you're learning new abilities, you're adjusting your armor, changing out your weapons. You have a party with you where you have Donald and Goofy and whatever other Disney character that you're that you're playing with at the time, that's depending on which world you're in. You have shops where you're buying items, and you upgrade ship and things like that, where it has all of the traditional JRPG elements to it. And there's even a small menu that you use. It may have been one of the first games, action RPGs, to actually incorporate a real-time menu as well, where you use the analog stick to move yourself around, but have the D-pad to select different commands, where it was a real hybrid of the turn-based menu system and the action RPG press a button to swing your sword kind of system.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it was one of the first ones that did that, which is one of the reasons that it's obvious that it has like these strong JRPG roots, is because some of that carries over from those other games that were before it. And yeah, it's just been interesting to see how things have like evolved over time and changed, because one of mine here is Monster Hunter, and I'm going to say Monster Hunter World because it's like the only one that I've actually gotten into, but I love that game. It's amazing. There's no question that it is an action RPG. Like, it's about getting
I disagree.
gear.
I completely disagree with you. I don't think I think there's a question, because it's always been an action game in my mind.
No, it's about getting gear and leveling up to get more gear to level up again. Like, it's, and you're telling a story and you're working your way through it, and you know, you increase your stats by getting gear. Just because your character doesn't have like a concrete level, that doesn't really matter. Like,
and to me, that's the part that hits me. It's like, this is an action game where I'm getting better gear, and it's where the twitch parts of it make so much of a difference that it feels like an action game to me. Like, that's one of those where it won't, like where we were talking about earlier with the genre being so fluid that different people see it in different ways. Like, this is one where I thought it was going to be more role-playing game, and because it turned out to be more action-oriented, I bounced off of it so hard.
Yeah, I mean, there's different levels of skill that you need and different levels of Twitch skills, but I guess for me, maybe like one of the mental lines that I've drawn, that again, you can argue either way because obviously you're coming down on the other side of it for this one, but it's like, the gear that you're getting, is it changing stats, or is it really just like changing the way that you play? Because there's a lot of games, I'm thinking about like Bayonetta and like Devil May Cry, and games where like you're getting new weapons along the way, or maybe new things that you can equip, but it doesn't have these like RPG stats necessarily that it ties back to. It's just like it handles differently, right? Like, you switch out the weapon because it's like a shotgun versus a handgun, and like they have different ways that they feel as you're playing, and there are trade-offs. There are games where you will switch between different sets of gear that you've acquired throughout the game, even all the way to the end of the game. You might go back to the things that you had as default at the very beginning of the game because they're still viable. Those don't feel like RPGs to me. Those feel like action games that are giving you options over time. Something like Monster Hunter World, you would never go back to your starting weapons or your starting armor because you're always progressing forward, because they're like actual stats that have numbers that are tied to all the different things that go up over time, and you're always improving. You're always moving towards the next one. And when you get to end game, you might have a couple different gear sets for like different circumstances, but you would never say, okay, forget all the end game gear I have, I'm going to go back to what I had in the first hour of the game. Do you know what I mean?
I do, but to me, it's kind of like that, like the Metroidvania thing, where you're doing pretty much the same thing, but I wouldn't consider those an action RPG, even though they have those same kind of progressions. It's weird. Like, the action RPG whole thing is a very, very odd way to look at it, because for some reason the lack of character development on there completely makes it so that it does not feel like an RPG to me.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm looking at your list now. Your whole list has character progression in it.
Yeah, and like Zelda doesn't have real character progression in it. You get hearts. You don't necessarily get stats or anything along the way. You just get more health.
Yep.
Where by my definition, by my definition of Monster Hunter, it would be an action game, but I consider it an RPG. And I don't know why. Like, you're listening to me, like the criteria is the same. It's just a double standard on my end.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, okay, let's talk about one that we both agree on that you have on your list, and I forgot it existed in this genre, is Final Fantasy 15.
And it is super controversial.
Yeah, I could see that. I just forgot that it was like, oh yeah, this is an action RPG, because it totally is. Like, that's the way that I played the game too.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Kingdom Hearts game. Like in terms of combat, the way that they have based all of the way that you fight every enemy, you can select things from menus. At the same time, you're pressing a button to swing the sword. You use abilities to warp. You use keybinds to warp around and target. But you have to be able to make use of a real-time menu system to use items and spells, what spells there were, and that kind of thing. It's like, and they were items technically. So I mean, it's Nomura who made it, so it's the same combat system, only changed and evolved a little bit. The same for Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's an action RPG.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, at least in Final Fantasy VII Remake, they have a mode in there that's turn-based, which is pretty sweet.
Right.
But no, I agree. That one's totally an action RPG too. But like, I like Final Fantasy 15. I liked it more for the story than the gameplay. The gameplay, it wasn't as boring as I find like Kingdom Hearts. Like, I just do not like the gameplay of Kingdom Hearts that much. I thought that Final Fantasy 15 was slightly more engaging, but not dramatically more engaging. It's kind of in the same realm. Like, I like 15 because it's a mainline Final Fantasy game, and I'm almost always willing to give those a lot of slack to get me invested in the story. And then once I'm invested, I'm in. So like, it was the story that really pulled me through that game.
And it's the opposite for me. Like, the story pulled me through it. Don't get me wrong. The story is by far the best part about that game. And it's why I want to go through and actually finish all of the episodes at some point that they've put out. But the combat for it, I felt it was clunkier than Kingdom Hearts. Even Kingdom Hearts 3, which was just too overwhelming in almost every way for the combat. I felt that in Final Fantasy 15, the combat was by far the weakest part of the game, that I never ended up enjoying it. That I didn't ever feel like it had the right amount of polish on it to play, that I thought every Kingdom Hearts game has pretty much done it better because they've made it more fluid and easier to accomplish what you're setting out to accomplish, I guess, is the way it feels.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Games iterate over time, but I just liked some of the basic approaches in 15 better than I liked some of the basic things in Kingdom Hearts. I don't know. Maybe it just clicked with me better for, no apparent reason, but it happens.
It does. It's like Zelda and Monster Hunter. For me, it's like just no apparent reason. It's just that's the way it was.
Yeah. So Xenoblade's on your list too, right?
Xenoblade is on my list. Like, Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2 are absolutely action RPGs because, I mean, they've got real-time combat. You walk up, you start fighting, but you get you get character progression, you get gear just like in any turn-based JRPG or even, RPG, Western RPG like Witcher 3 or Skyrim. But it's you also get kind of a queue system that you get used to in both of them, where you have the abilities that change in and out. You get different skills and blades in the second one that adjust how you play, where it changes what combat feels like. But at the heart, it's an auto attack game that you're then interacting with on a kind of queue system with the way the abilities work within a menu. Yeah. Waiting on timers.
No, I don't think there's any question about it. But you liked it. That's the main thing, right? Like, you really liked those games, even though I bounced off of them very hard.
I hated the first one's combat. When I tried it the first time, I did not like it. Then I got into Xenoblade 2, and it was a much, much, much polished version of Xenoblade Chronicles 1. And so when I went back after I'd beaten 2, it was like, oh, I see what they were trying to do here. That's how you use this. And I fully understood it because they had simplified it and polished it enough that I saw the base of the second game in there. So when I went back to the first one, I liked that action system.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. That makes a lot of sense. Well,
and even then, there's like Xenogears. It's a turn-based game, but it has combos like Street Fighter in it. It's like triangle, triangle, square X to do something, but it's within a certain period of time to do a combo within a turn-based game. It's kind of like Sabin in Final Fantasy VI, but that's just an outlier for a mechanic.
Right. Yeah, there's a couple of games in that realm where you have to like do something. Like, I'm thinking about Squall's Gunblade in Final Fantasy VIII, or what's the game? It's
Mario RPG where you hit the button. Legend of Dragoon.
Legend of Dragoon. That's what I was thinking of. Yep. Where you have to like time your attacks to like make them more effective. Yeah, there's a bunch of examples of stuff like that.
Where they bring in action elements into a turn-based RPG. Yep. As opposed to the other direction where they're bringing turn-based elements into an action game.
Yeah. So how about like Marvel Ultimate Alliance, which I know both of us have played this year, so that's one that's definitely more action than RPG in my mind.
It is. It's definitely more action. Like, it's a smashy game. Like, in my mind, it is, but I wouldn't consider it, and I wouldn't consider it just an action game. That it's got enough, like, you're unlocking stats and things, and because there's a story there that you're going through, because it kind of feels like Diablo, and Diablo is an RPG. I don't know. It's again, you're not necessarily getting. You're progressing a character in it, which I think is what gets me. Like, you're doing character levels to unlock different abilities, and then you unlock like alliance abilities as you go through, and you have like equipment with the ISO 8. So it's got that at the very basics, but it's still one of those like dungeon crawler RPGs that I don't usually spend a lot of time with. This one's a good like go and do a couple of things and then leave kind of game.
Yeah, that's exactly how I played it. I mean, it was really fun with the kids. It's not going to be like one of my games of the year by any measure, but as something that's easy to throw on with kind of like anybody, regardless of their skill level, and just like be a superhero and bash things, it's a great game for that.
Yep, absolutely. That's what I use it for, and that's why I like it, because and I think that's where it comes in. You be a superhero. Like when you said you be a superhero and bash things, where it's not as though you're playing as this superhero doing something like you do in a traditional action game. You said you be a superhero and you bash things. It's really that putting yourself in there kind of thing that makes it an RPG. It's weird that there are some things that make different people feel like that.
So, okay, what else is on your list? You have Tales of? Does that like all of the Tales of games?
Yeah, they are all action RPGs. They go into specific battle screens. Like you'll go, and this applies actually to Ni no Kuni 2 as well, where you have normal battles like you would in any normal turn-based RPG, where it's either an enemy on the field that you run into, or you get into a random battle. But once you get within that separate screen, it turns into an action RPG like Kingdom Hearts, where you're running around smashing things, you're pressing a button to perform an action, and you're doing button combos to be able to do special attacks. Like in the Tales of games, it was only until fairly recently that you weren't running on a 2D plane, that you could only move left and right and jump, but you couldn't run around in the 3D space. You were still on a track, which made it unique. And now I haven't played Zestiria or Berseria or Vesperia yet, the one on Switch, but the last few that I've played, you could hold a button down, like hold R1, I think, and then it would let you move around in 3D space. And when you let go of it, then you started doing more of the side-to-side combat like you usually do.
So how close is it to like Ni no Kuni 2? Because you mentioned that it was kind of similar.
They feel so similar, except for that last part.
Okay.
Like the 2D to 3D thing is a Tales game. That's definitely a Tales kind of mechanic. But Ni no Kuni 2 feels like a Tales game in a lot of ways, where you go into that kind of separate screen, and then it turns into a one button, one attack thing. Use triangle maybe to cast a spell, or you hold L1 to get your list of spells or something like that, where it's just like in Kingdom Hearts, but you're on a completely separate screen, and everything else about the game is traditional JRPG progression. You get the overworld map screen, you get new weapons to equip and attack with, you get new kinds of party members that you swap in and out, you get just all of the character progression that goes through, and spells to manage. All of this is just that when you go into that separate screen, it turns into like Kingdom Hearts combat, where you're within an arena doing that same kind of combat.
Yeah, and I think I kind of liked it when I tried it. I think Ni no Kuni 2 is one that I mentally have classified as a like maybe someday type of game. It's like if I'm in the right mood for the right type of game and the price is right on a system that's convenient for me, maybe someday I'll end up playing through that game. But like I rented it and I gave it a good couple hours just to kind of see what was there, and I definitely see why you liked it as much as you did.
And it's one, I haven't finished it yet. It actually blocked me because of hardcore RPG elements in it. Not even hardcore. I shouldn't even say hardcore, but it's a gate that you have to do some menial tasks to move through the main narrative, because of a side mission, because of side projects. Like there, you build up a town, and there's at one point that you cannot progress through the main story without going and collecting your enough villagers to live in your kingdom here. And it's like I didn't do all these side quests as I went through to recruit like these 19 villagers, and so now I'm having to go travel the world again just so I can progress the story and continue. And it's like that's very much a turn-based JRPG kind of system. And it's bad. Like that, I've stopped playing it, but I love the action combat in it because it's simple and responsive and fun without getting overly complicated.
Okay, yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, and that's some of like, does the game strike the right balance between action and RPG? And it doesn't always, like, regardless of any game we've talked about on this list. And it's different mixtures of those two genres work for different people, right? Because, like, one of mine here, I only have a couple left, it's like Mass Effect, like the whole series. But if you look at each game individually for Mass Effect, each one has a slightly different mix of like action shooter type of game and abilities that are like action abilities mixed with RPG elements. Because the first Mass Effect is actually really heavy on the RPG elements, and I didn't realize till I went back and tried to play it sometime in the last couple years. But like your skill at shooting matters so much less in Mass Effect 1. It's a lot more about the stats and the equipment and all that. By the time you get to Mass Effect 2, it feels like a shooter that has like RPG elements put onto it, except some of the abilities and stuff still feel RPG-ish. And then by the time you get to Mass Effect 3, it's like you're basically in like a third-person shooting game. And it's weird to see, not even weird, it's just interesting to see how it's changed over time.
And I've not played through very much of that series, and it makes me a little sad that it went that direction, because in the first one of the reasons when it was new, and this was when it was new, so bear that in mind, one of the reasons I didn't like it as much was because it was way too heavy on the shooter part of it, that I wanted it to be far more into the RPG part. And you said that it's the heaviest of any of them. So if I'd ever tried to go into the other ones, I probably would have bounced even harder.
Yeah, and, you know, honestly, I think that for most people, the best way, if you are going to try to get to the Mass Effect series, there's like it's not a graphic novel. It's some kind of like motion animation thing that's almost a comic, almost like a mini RPG thing where you can play through the story of Mass Effect 1 very simplified and make decisions and get the gist of the story. And then you can import that into Mass Effect 2. And I think that's probably the best way into the series, because Mass Effect 2 is honestly my favorite game in Mass Effect series. And I think that Mass Effect 2 strikes the best balance between shooting and RPG elements. So I like that game a lot.
And I've started to, but I've never gotten terribly far into it. So I need to go back and play it because I want to. It's one of those that's kind of on, it's in the place that Ni no Kuni is for you. Ni no Kuni 2 is, where I'm going to get to that. I would like to play that. I liked it enough to see what people liked about it, and I will get to that eventually.
Totally. And so the last game on my list is, I couldn't go without saying it in this episode, Dragalia Lost. Because it's probably the action RPG that I've played the most over the last year, because I've been playing it literally every single day. Like, it just hit the 1-year anniversary point, and I realized that I don't think I've missed a day of this game since I started playing it.
Wow.
And, like, I don't play it for a long time every day. I use it as part of, like, waking up, because I can do the same. It's some of the stuff that I hate in other games. It's like doing the same activities day after day with, like, only slight variations for only slight upgrades and slight advancement over time. I only can tolerate it because it's in a mobile game form, and I play it for, like, 15 minutes every morning as part of I'm like waking up and getting ready for work, just to get my brain out of sleep mode. And that's like literally what I use the game for. But I like it. Like, I do like this game. Otherwise I wouldn't go back and play it every single day.
And it's not a bad game. That's the thing about that one. It falls into more of the action RPG style that I tend not to like very much. But I had fun with this one. And it was, like I've said before, it was too heavy on some of the gacha elements and that minor progression over time. And where I just didn't have as much fun with it as you do. But it's absolutely a quality action RPG.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder if, you know, like last BlizzCon when everybody was booing them for Diablo, what is it, Immortal? Whatever the mobile one is. it makes me wonder if I'm going to like that game a lot more than most people, because I never stuck with like Diablo 1, 2, or 3. But if it's on mobile and if it's simplified and if the controls work to be like a one-handed game that doesn't take a whole lot of like mental processing power, I might actually click with that game, which is kind of weird.
We'll see how it goes, because it could be something on mobile that's worth it to spend the time on, but it could be just another hard pass.
Yeah, it could go either way. So there you guys go. A bunch of action RPG thoughts. We kind of thought we were going to do like our favorites and our top, but this ended up just being a discussion about like what even is an action RPG. So that's where the episode went, and I'm happy with it.
Yeah. We want to know what you think about this too.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point.
So this is something that, as you can tell, we're conflicted on, but not in any kind of negative way, that we don't know exactly where we stand on some of this. So hop on Discord, hop on Slack, tweet us, email us, whatever. Let us know what you feel like about with action RPGs and where you fall kind of on this spectrum on what you consider to be an action RPG, and which ones you like and don't like and hate and love.
Yes, it's a good conversation, and we want to keep having it with more people. And while you're there, leave us questions. We need more questions for our mailbag question episode once a year. You only have a couple weeks left before we record that one, so time is not quite of the essence yet, but we're getting there. All that being said, what do you have for our geeky offer of the week this week?
We've got Patreon again, you guys. So just to keep it very brief, head over to patreon.com/geek2geekcast, and you can become a patron saint of Geekery on Discord. You can just support the podcast in any way possible. You can do fantastic things to support us and keep us on the air.
Perfect. Around the network this week, Geekitude, it had Joe, and Ray was back. He's back from all of his travels he's been on lately. They talked about the Joker movie and a bunch of their impressions about it, which I like hearing because it makes me realize that movie is probably not for me and I can just skip it. But it was still a really good conversation around like, how do you do the Joker? What's the implications like in a cinematic universe or outside of one? And like, just how do you approach a character like that? It was a great conversation. Tea Time with Katie and Chelsea. Katie did a one-off special episode about LA Comic Con and kind of summarized what she did there and what it's all about, which was super interesting to hear about. Troidal is always streaming on Thursday mornings. Capsule J streams Tuesdays from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern and sometimes Thursdays and weekends. And the Geekery this week, of course, Austin and 13th Story. What were they writing about?
I don't think they did this week, so we'll just tell him to go find content. So go find content there.
Yes, go find content. There's lots of content for the Geekery, which usually there's a post or two every week from somebody or multiple people. So there's always stuff there you can check out. You can go to email. You can go and subscribe via email if you just want to get it delivered to you instead of seeking it out at geek2geekmedia.com/subscribe. With all of that out of the way, what do we have for Weekly Geekery this week?
Well, I think a couple of hours line up, so I'll do those.
Which is weird. That like never happens.
And it's because we were talking at the end of the episode last week after we stopped recording, and we made a couple of television recommendations to each other, and it turns out that both of us completely finished both of the recommendations for it, so we can actually talk about both of these things we recommended to each other.
Yeah, usually when we recommend stuff, we know each other well enough to be like, maybe try this, but you probably won't like it. And we both gave each other some recommendations. We're like, I don't know what you're going to think of this. And then both of us liked all of it. So we're talking about Fleabag and we're talking about The Boys, both of which are Amazon originals. And I think you and I binged all of it, right?
Yes, actually. You told me you didn't know what to think about The Boys, and I was on the fence of whether to watch it because I've been in the middle of kind of superhero burnout since Endgame happened, and so I haven't really wanted to pick up The Boys, but the way that you described it to me, and I don't even want to say how you described it to me, but it was because it was kind of spoilery.
So how do you describe it now that you've watched it?
So it's a superhero movie. It's a superhero series that doesn't feel like most superheroes. It does something different with superheroes, which is really what made me fall in love with it. It's not a typical superhero show. It feels like Rising Stars mixed with Watchmen, kind of mixed with Brandon Sanderson's Steelheart. There are different vibes that go on throughout the show, but one of the things that it deals with are kind of the societal ramifications of superheroes, like and real world issues that would happen, like what happens if the Flash doesn't pay attention and he runs through somebody else and they explode.
Yeah,
And like, how do you
this is one of the things. It's really good. It's really well done. It's very high quality. It is not for kids. It is a superhero thing, but it is adult only. Do not try to watch this with kids because you will get blindsided suddenly by like extreme violence, like someone who's basically the Flash running through somebody, and it's extremely like bloody and gory and like not for kids. But if you're an adult and you're ready for a twist on superheroes, this is a twist for sure.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's not a twist that if you've read Rising Stars or Watchmen or Steelheart, that is really going to feel out of place to you. Like it's going to be something 100% original, but the way that they handle everything, it has societal commentary in it. It's talking a lot about the current superhero culture that we have right now, as well as politics. But it's never really over the top, like in your face stuff. It's just dealing with societal issues through a lens of a superhero and from a superhero narrative. And it's fascinating, and every episode got better than the last one. That I am dying for season 2. I finished this last night and I just want season 2 right now.
That's funny because that's almost exactly what I wrote. I said it got better and better as it went along, which is rarely true of any show, and this one is extremely true. It just got better every episode, and I want more of this right now. Like I want season 2 as soon as I can get it.
It went places that I didn't expect it to. Like the way that this season ended, I didn't expect the way that they did it. Like I was expecting similar things. Like I'd seen a few things coming throughout the season of what happened, but the very, very end of it, the way that they played with what you do and the way reliable and unreliable narrators, it surprised me at the very end that I didn't think that was the route they were going to take.
Yeah, and like I want more of it. You know, it turns into this like intense and intriguing drama, and it doesn't shy away from like sex or violence. It's not like always about that, but it definitely has moments where it's like, okay, you should be an adult to watch this show. But one of the things that after thinking about it and finishing it and like giving it a couple days, it really reminds me of Game of Thrones. And the reason it does is because of what Game of Thrones did to the fantasy genre. It took the stereotypical setting of fantasy that everyone's like, oh yeah, I know what to expect with a fantasy story. But instead of that, Game of Thrones uses that setting to tell this like intricate and adult story. And that's what The Boys does, but with superheroes. Like, It's using superheroes in a modern day setting to tell this like intricate and adult story. And it's just part of the setting. Instead of being like, everyone's good, everyone's perfect, they're all like superheroes, that's not what they are. They're people, they're celebrities, they work for companies. There's a lot of like mega corporation implications in here that were just utterly fascinating.
Yeah, and it's not even that they're villains, or they're not heroes, you know, all the way through. It's not like they're villains either, like the Steelheart thing. It's where they turn evil eventually. There's no heroes. It's that they're people and they make decisions like people would in a situation like this. And so it just becomes something that we don't really see a lot of in the superhero genre. And so if you've been on the fence like I was about it, give it a shot. Watch it and see if this take on superheroes is something that would interest you, because it doesn't feel like superheroes so much as it feels, like you said, that's a good way of putting it, with Game of Thrones. It feels like an adult drama, just a drama for adults being told with superheroes in a completely different way than the Marvel Netflix movie or TV shows did. Yeah. Like, while those are for adults and they're telling those adult stories, this is not telling adult stories in a comic booky way.
No, it's not a comic book story. Like, yeah, I really think that like what Game of Thrones did and twisted fantasy in that direction, that's what The Boys is doing for like superheroes, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is based on a comic. I looked it up, and I didn't know that it was based on a Garth Ennis comic that was published by Wildstorm. And once I saw that it was a Garth Ennis comic, I was like, oh yeah, this is totally a Garth Ennis comic. It is 100% Garth Ennis. He did Preacher, and it was all over how the story was constructed that it was based on a Garth Ennis comic. And that's not a bad thing. It's now I've got to go read these comics because I didn't know. I thought this was a completely original property.
Yeah, it feels like. Well, I mean, it's an Amazon original, so I kind of suspected the same thing too. But so is the other one. So Fleabag, right? That's the other one that you and I both watched. I watched both seasons. Did you watch everything?
Yep, I watched everything, and that is all there is. That she has said, the creator of this show has said that is all there's going to be of this until, if she doesn't have, unless she has another idea, but she wants her to go and live her life for a while. The character to go and live her life for a while if she ever comes back to her.
Yeah, and it's not a ton of like TV either. They're like 22 to 27 minute episodes. Like they're in that kind of 20 to 30 minute realm. And there's only, is it 12 of them total? It's like 12 or 14.
Yeah,
like there's
12 between 12 and 15. Yeah, it's not many.
Yeah, and that's across both seasons. So like each season's like 6-7 episodes. Like it's not a huge ask, but it's really good and it's really fascinating. And I don't know how to like recommend it to people because there's not a whole lot there for me to compare it to, which is usually where you want to go if you don't want to have spoilers. And the one thing I could think of is that this is a slice of life. Like it is an early 30s slice of life for this woman, and it's telling a different kind of adult story. It's not like extremely violent, but there is sex in it. But a lot of it becomes about like family relationships and how you like, relate to other people romantically or as a couple, or just like how do you deal with your siblings when you're an adult, or your grown-up parents. And all of that kind of stuff gets intertwined into this very, very interesting slice of life that just like pulled me through the whole thing, and it was all I wanted to watch until I finished it.
Yeah, I was the same way. Jennifer discovered it while I was in Mexico because this won a bunch of Emmys. That Fleabag won a lot of Emmys, and we had never even heard of it. Like, we had seen, I think, the cards on Amazon being like, okay, there's this thing that didn't look like anything to us, but it got all of this praise. It won all of these awards, and Jennifer went and looked it up to see what stuff was, and she started watching it, and she watched the first episode of it and was like, I don't know if I like this. And then she let the second episode play. And then she was like, I still don't know if I like this. Then she let the third episode play. And she watched it. I was like, I guess I like this show, I think. And continued to watch it.
That is how I felt watching it too. That's
what I told you. That was how I pitched it. I remember when I told you, I was like, this isn't a show that you have to give 2 or 3 episodes to determine whether you're going to watch it. Like, that's not the way it works. Like, for it to find its feet. It finds its feet in the first 5 minutes of the show.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's whether or not that show is for you, but it's kind of like the way that you were with Red Dead Redemption, where you're not sure how you feel about it for a little while, but at the same time, you continue because you are unabashedly engaged with it. And you want to see what's going on, and it's just so well done that you both love and hate the characters at the same time. Like, you love watching them, you hate some of them, and it's like the acting and casting is just so well done throughout the entire thing. And I don't know what it's about. Like, it's about, like you said, being early 30s character and family relationships and like dealing with trauma and trying to survive and be a human being again after major life traumas. It's very powerful, but hilarious.
It's good. It's like really good. So I think really both of us recommend The Boys and Fleabag as Amazon originals, and also don't watch them with children. Don't watch either one with children. Please don't do that.
Nope. You can start Fleabag, and within the first 5 minutes of that show, if your kids are in the room, you're going to have a fun discussion with them.
Yeah, don't do that. No, but those are both good. What else have you been up to besides watching those?
Mainly playing Dragon Quest XI on the Switch. Like, I'm finally past where I was when I stopped playing it, and so the new combat speed up is great. Like, I love games that are now letting you speed up combat. That the ultra fast or very fast, whatever it is in DQ11, has made it so that I've gone through, even watching all but like 1 or 2 cutscenes, I got to the point where I was in the original game in like 14 14 hours as opposed to like 22. And so now I'm at like 28 hours and I'm significantly further than I was. That the combat speed up helps a lot in this game. And like I just got to the point where I'm into some of the new content that they've added in for the Switch, where they're kind of side stories for the characters. And I love the characters in this game. And these are interesting stories and interesting gameplay, but they've put them in the wrong place. They should have let these be optional at some point. So if anybody's playing this and you get to the point where you get to Act 2, and you're going to know when you get to Act 2. When you get to Act 2 and the game gives you these side stories, push through them. They're only a couple of hours because they break the narrative in such a way that it's like, I want to know more about the main narrative instead of these side stories. Even though the side stories are pertinent to these characters, it's like they put them in a wrong place and they should have been like selectable from a menu later on as a flashback gameplay kind of DLC thing like some games do. It's weird where they put them in, but I'm almost through with them and I'm glad they exist, but I'm not sure I agree with where they put them in at.
But you're still liking it on Switch a lot, right?
Oh, yeah. It is one of the best RPGs I've ever played.
Okay.
It is so good. Like, I know you bounced off of it really hard, but it is it is absolutely going to be in my top 5 of the year this year. No doubt in my mind.
Cool. That's awesome. I mean, I have a couple books I've been reading. I'm going to hold on to them for next week just because we're getting there on time. And I have some of the more recent game releases that have been coming out that I've been trying. And I think maybe next week we'll just play catch up a little bit with like games that have been coming out and other things that are going on because it's October and it's busy. So I'll hold those too. So the one other thing I want to talk about before we wrap up is I watched Spider-Man Far From Home finally.
Awesome.
And it is a really good movie and I liked it a lot. I don't have a whole lot else to say that you haven't said about it already, right. Except that the Mysterio segments were extremely well done and they were confusing in a way that you can keep up with, which is extremely hard to pull off from a filmmaking perspective. I was like in awe of the filmmaking of those sequences specifically because it was just so well done. And I know how difficult that was to do. It was just incredible.
Yeah, just watching it, it's like you're keeping track of the logistics of it while still being confused.
And that's hard to do. It's hard to have confusing that also makes sense at the same time because they're like fundamentally opposed.
And they pulled it off in this one. They made it, the Mysterio parts of this, feel like reading Mysterio comics, but it not in a weird, hokey kind of comic booky way. I love this movie. I haven't watched it again since the theater, but I really, really look forward to watching this one again.
Yeah, I liked it a lot. And like Tom Holland is still he's the best Spider-Man ever. Like, I don't know how anybody's going to outdo him after this. He sells all the aspects of Peter Parker so well. You know, he's awkward, but he's super smart and he's extremely capable, but totally unsure of himself at the same time. Like, he's the perfect casting for Peter Parker. And
I think he is, yeah.
I don't know if they will ever find a better casting for him. So I hope that they don't mess it up through their deals and with Sony and Sony jerking Disney around and stuff.
Well, they've fixed that now. They've come to an agreement. They're doing things like that. Spider-Man staying in the MCU. All of this is going on. Like all the stuff's good again. And it's because of Tom Holland kind of mediating between them. Like everything that you just said about him being Peter Parker is apparently true in real life. That he is super capable and made sure that they came to an amicable agreement and saved the MCU.
Yay. Thank you, Tom Holland, for saving the MCU. I don't know if I'm going to go that far. Thank you for saving Spider-Man, though. That's good. I'm glad that it's going to stay with the current setup where it's Sony and it's Disney, and like they've made 2 great movies. I want to see the next one, basically.
Yeah. I'm glad because Peter Parker and Spider-Man have kind of become the face of this phase of the MCU, kind of like Iron Man was. I mean, they've obviously set it up for that, but he is the one that you're looking at now as the Captain America and Iron Man of this phase. And if we had lost that I think a lot of what's appealing about these next few movies would have been gone.
Yeah. So I liked it. I want more. I want more of this Peter Parker and this Spider-Man and everything that comes with it. That's probably it for this week. You guys can write to us with comments, suggestions, or feedback. Our email address is geek2geekcast@gmail.com. Please send us questions. Only a couple weeks left. Or reach us on Twitter at geek2geekcast. We also have longer discussion threads on our subreddit at reddit.com/r/geek2geekcast.
We also have great discussions on Slack and Discord. You can go to geek2geekmedia.com for invite links, and you can check out all of the other content on the network while you're there.
I blog at agreenmushroom.com, and you can find me at grnmushroom. That's green mushroom without the E's on Twitter.
I'm on Twitter as @Professor Beej. That's Beej with 2 E's, and you can listen to my sweet, sweet voice even more on the Dragon Quest FM podcast.
We've been Void and Beej with your Geek to Geek podcast. That'll do it for this week. See you next week, geeks.
Bye, guys. Send us questions.
Hey geeks, this is Capsule J. I'm a streamer on the Geek to Geek Media Network. If you like discovering new games and chatting with cool nerdy folks, be sure to check out my channel on Twitch. You can find it at twitch.tv/CapsuleJ. That's CapsuleJay. I stream a blend of indies, retro games, and RPGs most Tuesday nights from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern, and occasionally on Thursdays and weekends. Hope to see you then.
Hi, my name is Joe Hogan, and I'm a geek. And if you're currently listening to this, there's a good chance you're a geek too. So check out my podcast, Geektitude. Each week, I talk with somebody about their geek aptitude. Sometimes I talk to people in a geeky profession. Sometimes it's someone doing something really cool with their geekiness. Often it's another geeky podcaster. But it's always someone who wants to share their inner geek. So join me each week as we come together to geek out about all the geeky stuff we love. And remember, this week, keep it geek.
Hello friends, this is Troidal Power inviting you to join me over on Twitch most weeknights, sometime after dinner. Video games have always been a social hobby for me, with friends and family crammed together on a couch, chatting away while someone holds the controller. And thanks to the power of the internet, I've got my own virtual couch over on Twitch, where you can kick back and goof off while I play games. Find me on Twitch by searching Troidal Power, that's TROYTLE Power, to snag a spot on the couch.
Hello, I'm Katie.
And I'm Chelsea.
And together we are Tea Time with Katie and Chelsea, a podcast all about pop culture.
We talk about books, movies, music, basically anything we want at this point. Yes, we obsess about K-pop.
And Keanu Reeves.
And sometimes Katie cries on the podcast.
Hey, that's rude.
But really, we're just here to talk about all the things that we love, so make sure to head over to teatimewithkc.com and geek2geekmedia.com to check us out. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to our show wherever you download your podcasts.
Bye.